Shalom Chaverim. Today Parashat Vayishlakh, and we're going to do it together with the very fantastic and moving Isaiah Berlin. So I'm going to start with a quote, probably paraphrased, but nonetheless very representing of Berlin. If you are truly convinced that there is some solution to all human problems, that one can conceive an ideal society which men can reach if only they do what is necessary to attain it, then you and your followers must believe that no price can be too high to pay in order to open the gates of such paradise. Very, very beautiful, very wise, and one thing that I really like about Berlin is very understandable. Okay, so Isaiah Berlin was a Jewish, Russian and British, basically born in the Russian Empire and basically teaching and working in England. So he was a Russian-British political philosopher and historian of ideas. He was born in 1909 and died in 1997. So yet again, another 20th century thinker. What I paraphrase actually comes from an essay that was first read in Turin in 1988. And you can find it in this incredible anthology of essays by him, which pretty much collects all of his important essays. It's divided to categories. It's a fantastic, fantastic book. It's called The Proper Study of Mankind. What was Berlin talking about? And this is something that lies in the core of his philosophy. So basically, he was going against what he defines as a monistic way of thinking, all right? It comes from the word monism, mono, one, which basically deduce philosophical thinking to one truth. And while Berlin explains that this works in scientific reasoning, it doesn't work when it's used to try and solve human problems. So he basically says that in our modern time, there are always three assumptions that are made in philosophical inquiry when we try to solve problems, and it really comes from scientific reasoning. So what are the three assumptions? One, that there is always one true answer to a problem. Two, that there must be a way to get to that answer. Basically, there's some sort of methodology that is used to get to that one true answer. And three, that once arriving at that truth, it must be compatible with other truths. So what Berlin is saying is that while this works in mathematical problems, it doesn't work when applied to solve human problems. And that is what's at the core of the terror that was brought to the 20th century that he was writing in. And this is what plagued that century and still really, really disrupting our lives today. And I will give more examples for what he meant later. Let's look at our portion. So our portion, Vayishlakh, it has many things in it, but the one that I want to really focus on today is the wrestling, the famous wrestling of Jacob and the angel. So let's read a little bit Torah from Bereshit. ויוותר יעקב לבדו, ויאבק איש עמו עד עלות השחר. Jacob was left alone, and a figure wrestled with him until the break of dawn. וירא כי לא יכול לו, ויגע בכף ירכו, ותקע כף ירך יעקב בהיאבקו עמו. When he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he wrenched Jacob's hip at its socket, so that the socket of the hip was strained as he wrestled with him. ויאמר שלחני כי עלה השחר, ויאמר לא אשלחך כי אם ברכתני. Then he said, let me go, for dawn is breaking. But he answered, I will not let you go unless you bless me. That is, Jacob asked to be blessed. ויאמר אליו, מה שמך? ויאמר יעקב. Said the other, the angel, what is your name? He replied, Jacob. ויאמר לא יעקב, יאמר עוד שמך כי אם ישראל, כי שרית עם אלוהים ועם אנשים ותוכל. Said he, your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel. For you have striven with beings, divine and human, and have prevailed. So, who was that angel? Of course, there are many interpretations. Our sages, if we look at the Midrashim, specifically Bereshit Rabbah, suggests that this was Esau's guardian angel. To put the story in context, this is really kind of like the night before the dreadful meeting with his brother Esau that some of you may remember was after him to kill him, and so it's kind of like an anxiety dream, if you will. And so the sage says in Bereshit Rabbah, this was Esau's guardian angel. So the sages agree on that, but they disagree about how it looked like. What was the form of that angel? And so actually from the Talmud in Masechet Chulin, there are different opinions. So some sages said that he looked like a bandit. And some sages said that he looked like the worshiper of false idols, Oved Kochavim v'Mazalot. But then, interestingly enough, we have here Rabbi Rav Shmuel Bar Acha, who suggests that he looked like a rabbi, that he looked like a wise man. This is curious, right? So a lot of interpretations said maybe Jacob was wrestling evil inclination. So we can see evil inclination in a form of a bandit, but how can even evil inclination wear the form of a wise man, of a rabbi? And to that, my favorite buddy, this really reliable friend, Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, have something incredible to say. So he's saying, it may be surprising, but just as there is an evil inclination to falsehood, the desire to constantly adhere to the truth can be a type of evil inclination as well. One that at times is much worse than the inclination to falsehood. Wow. So there's something very, very big here. So what Steinsaltz is saying is that, look, it's very easy to identify evil inclination when it comes to you. For example, when someone comes and try to tempt you to do something that is obviously bad for you, right? So a friend comes and said, yeah, I know you need to work tomorrow, but let's party all night. Let's do this drug or that. Let's go and explore other things. But it's easy to identify. But it's not easy to identify evil inclination when it comes in the form of someone that enlightens your way to a big truth that you suddenly feel like you want to be a part of. And that is exactly what Isaiah Berlin is trying to tell us in his beautiful philosophy. So Berlin says that with the enlightenment and with the celebration of reason, or what we would call the scientific revolution, the ways to get to certain truth became scientific. That's what he talked about with the three assumptions. But the problem is when you present a certain truth that is utopian, that is final, that is absolute, then you have no room for everyone. And as he explained, there's no, there's basically, I'm gonna get back to how it's written. Yeah, there's no price that can be too high to pay in order to open the gates to such paradise. And to illustrate it, Berlin brings an example that is just mind-blowing to me when I read it, because that example that he brought is extremely Jewish. So he brings the example of justice and mercy as basically two elements that are contradictory when it comes to trying and compromise human issues. What do we mean by that? Most societies would try to enact some form of justice system in order to punish those who could mean harm to the members of that society and to protect the members of that society. So there's one form of justice. At the same time, that justice can be very harmful, especially to those in the margins, right? That justice can be violent. It can be unfair. So to punish a person that steals bread to feed their family is that justice? And here you want to enact with mercy. And so Berlin brings it as an example of a contradiction. So there could not be an absolute value. There cannot be one true answer when we come to solve human problems. We cannot just strive for justice, because on the other side of justice, there is mercy. And I said that when I read it, I was like, wow, it's incredibly Jewish, because we have a Rashi on the first verse of the Torah. Bereshit bara Elohim, the first verse of the Torah, and Rashi writes, bara Elohim ולא נאמר bara, שבתחילה עלה במחשבה לבראותו במידת הדין, ראה שאין העולם מתקיים, הקדים מידת רחמים, ושיתפה למידת הדין. So what Rashi is saying here, the Lord, the merciful one, created, because at first God intended to create the world to be placed under the attribute or the rule of strict justice, but he realized that the world could not thus endure and therefore gave precedence to divine mercy, allying it with divine justice. So we see in the first verse of our Torah, right? The first, Rashi, one of the first Rashis, is as beautiful as justice is, it cannot precede mercy. He gives another example of two values that cannot be compromised, that of liberty and equality. And really, his words are just so beautiful about it, if I can find it in this really huge book. Okay, so he says, but liberty and equality are among the primary, yes it is, but liberty and equality are among the primary goals pursued by human beings through many centuries. But total liberty for wolves is death to the lambs. Total liberty of the powerful, the gifted, is not compatible with the rights to decent existence of the weak and the less gifted. Of course, freedom that we value so much, right? So it's like freedom for the wolf, right, would be death for the lamb, right? How do you compromise, right? How you compromise freedom with equality? Probably, some of the most contradictory values that we still are unable to compromise. And Berlin would say, you don't have to. You just have to understand that they are both a part of who we are as human. That is not one truth. It just doesn't work that way. So he basically kind of took out philosophy from the age of reason, if you will. one important defense for Berlin, and it's important to understand that in that he wasn't a relativist. He wasn't a relativist in the sense that he didn't believe that everyone is entitled to their own values and their values are just sacred and great, because he did believe that all humans share a common rational core that defines us as humans. And where we differ is on the ways to attain our common goal. So with that, he wasn't a relativist, but rather a pluralist, and a pluralist in a very true sense of the word. And he really thought that understanding that is the key to have dialogue, is the key to have dialogue between people, which is something that is so needed today. And I'll just give you one example. So for example, if you think of purity, so you would have one person, let's say a religious person, that for them purity would mean to chastity, or it would mean, a humble appearance, right? To maintain some sort of purity, where purity is still the goal. For another person, purity would be only eating what's comes of nature, of not polluting, of, being a vegan, of going and gathering, things from the ground, and that is purity. Both people could be very, very different. One might be very progressive, one might be very conservative, but at the end of the day, that one value that they share is purity. And once they understand it, they could actually have dialogue, even though they seem like they have nothing in common. And this is very, very important. So I want to conclude by bringing it back to abortion and really saying that what's so powerful about abortion, especially because this is the defining moment of who we are, the naming of our nation, Israel, the wrestling, so is that our nation, the nation of Israel, is the meaning of it is that to wrestle with anyone, wise or evil, we must, because we must wrestle those who try to sell us the truth. Shabbat Shalom.